Hello, I'm Shannon Orme, DSO clarinetist and bass clarinetist, and I'm here to talk today with past Elaine Lebenbom Memorial Award winners for female composers, Missy Mazzoli and Sarah Kirkland Snider, and the current awardee, Veronika Krausas. And I was very lucky to be able to play the premieres of Sarah and Missy's works a few years ago, and very much looking forward to Veronica's premiere coming up. Playing new music is one of my big passions. It's a very important part of our programming here in Detroit, and we are very supportive of new emerging composers, especially female composers. The Lebenbom Award is granted annually to a living woman composer of any age or nationality in the spirit of recognizing and supporting the creation of new orchestral works by women. Established in 2006, the award is the only of its type among major orchestras and includes the commission of a new orchestral piece to be premiered by the DSO, a $10,000 cash prize, and a 1-month residency at the UCross Foundation, an acclaimed arts retreat in northern Wyoming. I'm also a big fan of Wyoming. Missy, let's start with you. Tell us about yourself and your piece that you premiered with the DSO.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Missy Mazzoli. I'm here in my studio in Brooklyn, New York, and I now do a lot of different things as a composer. I'm writing a lot of opera, some orchestral music, a lot of chamber music, performing a lot. A huge highlight over the last 10 years was being able to write for the Detroit Symphony. It was amazing. I wrote a piece called River Rouge Transfiguration, and it really took inspiration from Detroit itself. I had traveled there on tour with my band in 2010. It's a city that has been through so many different phases in such a short amount of time and created so many amazing things. Detroit techno, and then this sort of flourishing in the 20s, when they called Detroit America's Mecca. So I really fell in love with it. And just like the layers of the city were really inspiring to me. So this piece is based on photographs by Charles Sheeler, who took photographs of the factories. And in particular, there's one of the River Rouge plant called Crisscross Conveyors, which makes it look like a giant pipe organ, and these conveyor belts sort of form this cross. And I go back to religious imagery and iconography a lot in my work. And it just sort of one of those moments when everything came together, and I imagined the orchestra transformed into a giant pipe organ, and this factory transformed into a giant pipe organ. So that was my inspiration for that work. And it was amazing to be in Detroit working with the players, and also to be in Wyoming for a month was really life-changing. I've never seen a sky that big. It was great.
Fantastic. Well, thanks. Sarah, let's move on to you.
I'm Sarah Kirkland Snider. I'm working on a bunch of different projects at the moment. I recently completed a piece for the New York Philharmonic and released an album of choral music this past year called Mass for the Endangered. And now I'm working on my first opera. So that's a big new adventure for me. One of the highlights of my past decade of my career was definitely writing for the DSO. It was my first big name orchestral commission. And it was really thrilling to come out, and have this in-person rehearsal with a major orchestra and, work with Giancarlo Guerrero, who was just incredible. And the orchestra was amazing. And the first read through blew my mind. I mean, to work with an orchestra of that caliber, I hadn't been expecting it to go as well as it did. And from the first, few bars that they read, it was just magical. I've been really fortunate to have a number of performances come out of that experience. And I think ultimately it led to me getting this commission from the New York Phil. So it did amazing things for my career, for which I'm really grateful.
There is a sense of drama in your piece, it's very cinematic, and I felt, if Ken Burns ever writes a documentary about Detroit, yours is going to be the theme for it. It's very, just with the brass and the colors of sound in the background. I sense like a vision of Detroit when I was listening to your music.
I think unconsciously, I kept thinking about. It was hard for me not to. Part of me felt like, oh, I shouldn't write about the history of Detroit because it's it's so big and it's too daunting, and I don't live there and I shouldn't try to comment on it, but it was hard not to think about it. You know, the story of everything that Detroit has been through, and the fact that it was once, you know, the beacon of American capitalism. And these stories were so inspiring to me. And I just thought, wow, you know, I want to tell this story that starts with this big, bold idea of heroism, and then kind of falls apart, and then tries to discover itself again, but instead finds something else different that's not the same version of heroism, but maybe something a little more real. The title was inspired by a poem by Philip Levine, who's a Detroit, or was a Detroit-based poet, who wrote a lot about the Detroit working class. He wrote this beautiful poem for his wife called For Fran, and the title of the piece comes from the last two lines of that poem.
Fantastic. So for both Missy and Sarah, would you say that this award was maybe not a launching pad, but it did kind of raise you up in some more of like a national, international level as a composer? It helped create some visibility.
I think so, definitely. I think these kinds of awards are a huge help.
Veronica, tell us about yourself and your history and the piece you have coming up with us on May 8th.
So thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled. Veronika Krausas, and I'm speaking to you from my studio in Los Angeles. I'm a Canadian composer who's been living in LA for 25 something years, although I was born in Australia and my family is Lithuanian. So it's a little bit of a, which is that Heinz 57 sort of thing, a bit of a mix of everything. When I received the phone call about the commission, I was thrilled, but interestingly, I was just in pre-production for the last opera I did. And as you all know, pre-production a week or a month before an actual premiere of an opera I was completely out of my mind. And I don't think it registered what was happening. And I've been wanting to write an orchestra piece for years because I've been primarily doing operas and chamber work, or working with acrobats, or working with weird, sort of stranger, let's say extraterrestrial things, rather than just straight ahead concert music. So once I sort of processed it, I was absolutely thrilled. And I started researching Detroit because I've been to Detroit. One of my oldest friends lives there, but my knowledge of the city is really limited. So I actually went to a source called Atlas Obscura. I started searching through their pages, what about Detroit makes Detroit Detroit? And I found a building there called Book Tower, which had these 12 female statues, these Caryatids, sort of standing and holding up the roof. It's from Greek mythology, where these Caryatids were the sort of maidens of Caryae, or they were maidens supporting or celebrating the goddess Artemis. And I thought, that sounds perfect. And I've always had this sort of love affair with sculpture and stones and rocks and things like that. And so I thought this is a perfect combination of all that. And the other thing about naming it after the Caryatids, these 12 women who are so strong, literally supporting buildings and stone, is that I thought about the women who I know have come from Detroit. So, Madonna, hugely amazing, influential woman. I mean, Rosa Parks was born in Detroit. And I remember when I graduated with my doctorate at USC, she was getting an honorary doctorate. And that's the one of the two things I remember from the whole ceremony was that Rosa Parks was there, getting an honorary doctorate. And there have been so many other women there.
Aretha Franklin.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, the list is so enormous. So I thought, well, this makes sense. Honoring women. It's a Women's Composers Award. So I thought that would make sense. So I had this big plan for orchestra. I thought, this is fantastic. And then COVID hit. So nobody knew if there was going to be a season. And we slowly whittled it down to 12 performers.
Oh, wow.
So we went from 70 to 12, with the possibility of expanding a little bit. And over the course of just finishing it, it was determined that there were actually a few more performers. So I think it's about 21 performers now. So it's still not a full orchestra piece, but I guess it's the closest thing anyone can get to during COVID and get a performance. So this was a little bit odd because my whole concept of the piece was for full orchestra. And when it went down to this sort of miniature version, I couldn't reconceive it. So it's still my original idea for having these Caryatids supporting the music and their dance-like celebrations of the goddess Artemis and just sort of in my mind of women in Detroit and Elaine Lebenbom and those of women composers before us who have supported us in what we do. Because there are these 12 Caryatids, I made a chord for each of them. And these chords are sort of the basis. And I tried to mirror the architectural idea of a building, even though the building isn't quite, square like that or rectangular, but the idea of having these 4 supporting columns of these chords that come in and sort of blast like fanfares. And then the intervening sections, or what I was calling the walls, are sort of almost like a dance suite. So various dances, because the maidens of Caryatids in the Greek village that honored Artemis, they would do dances holding baskets of vegetables and plants on their heads, which is why they're often represented, holding the roof of a building up and whatnot. So I was thinking, well, if they're dancing, why don't I do something that sounds like a sarabande? Why don't I do my version of a courante? Why don't I do my version of, So that was the idea to the piece, and it has a gentle ending where there's the spirit sort of lingers and spreads by the end of it.
I'm really looking forward to listening to it. So let's go back and talk about what it's like being is it safe to say still a woman in a man's world in the world of composition? I mean, can we just throw that phrase away? It probably all starts with Elaine. She's the one that the award honors. She was born in Detroit in 1933, and despite her talent as a composer, making a career was difficult for her. She faced overt sexism and discrimination in the musical field, often having pieces rejected, rescinded upon orchestras learning she was a woman, and she was also a Jewish woman. But she persisted and ultimately earning praise as both a composer and a tireless advocate for women's representation in the arts. What is it like being a composer and a female composer in today's world?
I don't work with anyone. I don't hire anyone who makes me feel self-conscious about my gender. So I'm happily in a position of power now where I don't need to confront some of the more aggressive sexism that I did when I was younger. But I mean, I feel like, I think that any female composer who maybe died in the 50s, 60s, 70s, up to the 90s, would be shocked at how little progress we've made. I know that when I entered college 20 years ago, I thought that by now, I just turned 40, by now that we would be much closer to equal representation in the music field. And I feel like the problems that Elaine faced, certainly things are better, but there are a lot of the same problems. And I feel like, there's this idea, I always go back to this idea of proof versus potential, which, a lot has been coming out about that in the wake of our recent elections, and in the upcoming New York mayoral election. There was a big op-ed about this morning, actually, where men are hired for things based on potential, whereas women are asked to supply proof. And I think that I come back to this, every day in orchestral music and in opera, especially. So I think that, one thing that still has to change is organizations need to be taking more chances on younger, female, non-binary, gender non-conforming composers who have tremendous potential, and they just need someone to see that potential in them instead of people continually asking for proof. And this is something that, I've encountered myself As a younger composer, I see it, I'm on panels and juries and admissions for colleges, and I see, the female composers being treated differently still. So I think that there's still a long way to go.
Right. Yeah, so much truth in that. So Veronica, for you, how has composing changed in your lifetime and also since Elaine's lifetime?
And I'm an older generation than Missy, and one of the things that I remember is I was raised in a family where there was no sort of, you're a girl, you can't do things. So my first memorable experience of sort of chauvinism was when I had a job, and oh, you're the new girl, your day to make coffee is this day. And I went, I don't drink coffee. And I wasn't very popular with the office manager when I said that, and that made me realize, oh, what's going on here? So when I went into music, I decided that I would just ignore the fact I was a woman, which sounds sort of odd. And I thought, I don't want to ghettoize being a woman composer. However, I have to say it was hard because there weren't really as many sort of really influential women composers. I was in Canada, so one of my first teachers was Alexina Louis, who's a very well-known Canadian composer, ridiculously accomplished, wonderful woman, who's had her pieces played all over the world. So for me, that was a good role. She was a great role model. But then over the years of teaching and having students, I realized, and especially after, Missy, when you guys started Luna Lab, and also I even said that, you guys, and it's, you girls started Luna Lab, these things that are so ingrained in what we do and we sometimes don't even think about them. I realized the importance of really specific mentorship for women. I sort of shifted my idea of it's not ghettoizing it, it's actually supporting it to bring it into the mainstream, as you said. So that idea of having an equal balance, things can't always be balanced, but wouldn't it be interesting for a while to have the balance go the other way? And that might be fun.
Yes, it would be. It's about time. So Sarah, to you, how do you feel about being characterized as a woman composer?
I would much prefer to just be a composer. But, I get that people want to talk about this, and it's always the elephant in the room. Whenever I'm on a talk back after a concert or, anything like that, people always want to ask this question: what's it like to be a woman composer? Everybody wants to know about this. I've been on panels I've been in talkbacks where certain other women composers refuse to answer the question. And I think there's value in answering the question. I think there's value in talking about this. I think we are women composers. I think it's important to address the fact that we haven't been treated equally and it's not fair. And, there are a lot of really important systemic reasons for that we need to talk about. We need to talk about all the historical reasons that have existed that have shut out women. And, we need to talk about what happened to Elaine Lebenbom and all the other Elaine Lebenboms. And we need to paint a really clear picture of what's happened so that people understand why we don't know of as many female composers. I think the thing that drives me the most crazy is when there's this assumption that women just haven't been interested in writing music. This is a question that I get asked a lot, like, why haven't there been more female composers? Why haven't women been interested in writing music? And I think that's the question that drives me the most crazy, because I think that's the myth that sexist thinking likes to propagate. I think as long as there has been a human race, there have been women wanting to write music and writing music, and they've just been, discouraged or shut out of the field. So I think it's absolutely essential that we tell their stories and, figure out a way to really set the historical record straight.
I might add in here, I think it was Augusta Reed Thomas who in an interview got asked, how does it feel to be a female composer? And she turned around and said to the interviewer, how does it feel to be a male interviewer? And I always thought that was one of the most brilliant things. I don't know, what does it feel like? It feels like this,
Yeah.
in music in general, I feel like it's just getting harder to label music now. There's so much fusion going on, which is so exciting. Are you writing classical music exclusively, and what does that mean now?
I mean, this is like the $1,000,000 question. And the further I go with my work, the farther away from labels I get. So I'm less and less able to sort of describe my work, excuse me, or apply a label to it. I do know that I feel very comfortable with the word composer because that is the tradition that I fell in love with as a kid. And I was educated in that tradition, and I like feeling a connection to the past in that sense. So I don't usually use the word classical, but I like the word composer. In terms of being called a woman composer or female composer, I think in 99% of professional situations, we should not be talked about that way. I think it's a term that does more harm than good. But the exceptions, and I think that Veronika and Sarah were also sort of getting at this. It's like in early education where students are just coming out of like junior high school or middle school, and they've never met a living female composer. I think it's important to stand up there and say, like, I'm a woman, I write music, let's hang out. And I think it's important for young people in any field to have mentors that, who look like them, and to have a space where they're just making music with people who look like them, even if that's just like 10% of their musical activity. And that's what I try to do with my program, Luna Composition Lab, which mentors, composers, female, non-binary, and gender non-conforming composers ages 12 to 18. And we intentionally focus on that young age group because I do think it's appropriate for education purposes to speak freely about being a woman, and I'm comfortable identifying myself that way in that situation. But as a professional, I think the most powerful thing that can be done if you want to promote music by women and is to just put that music next to the classics, program it next to a Beethoven symphony, program it next to a male composer who's really celebrated, and just let it stand on its own.
Fantastic. That's so fantastic that you're offering that space for young kids to grow, that safe space, because it's such a sensitive time in their life where they discover their creativity and what's possible. So that's so fantastic that you're doing that. Veronika, did you have something to add about, labeling and categorizing music now, like new music?
I think I'm a little less pop oriented in what I do, but again, I tend to work very collaboratively with very many different arts and artists and performers. So sometimes it's going, with opera, it's easy to categorize opera. But the other things where it's with acrobats or dancers or something, it's a little less standard, let's say. Missy was talking about, I'm comfortable being called a composer. I agree. Being called a woman composer goes into that area of, I don't want to be ghettoized as that. I'm equivalent to anyone else as a composer, regardless of gender. And one of the things I know, someone who wasn't in the music world said, isn't it odd that people refer to you when they rehearse your piece and they say, oh, okay, the Krausas is next. All right, the Schneiders next. All right, the Mazzolis next. And I said, no, it feels normal that it's just your name and there's no gender attached to that. But I also don't like that the background of that tradition has been suppressing women composers, people of color.
As a composer, what obstacles did you face that you weren't expecting, especially early on in your career? Did things come easier than you were expected as a composer? Because I can imagine breaking out as a composer has got to be really difficult.
Something that was really surprising about the DSO, just winning the Lebenbom in general, because I think it was a really sort of a wake up moment for me, just about the field in general. I never apply for things. I randomly decided to apply for this the last minute. I sent it in the night before, then I forgot about it. And then I got the call from Eric, and it was like this number from Michigan. I was like, who's calling from Michigan? And he was like, hi, it's Eric Ronmark from, the DSO. I just wanted to tell you that you won the Lebenbom. And I was like, I won the what? It took a minute for me to understand what was happening. And then And then I was like, oh, and he said, you know, the reason why we decided to give this to you is because we really loved Penelope. And I was just completely shocked. And because Penelope was this song cycle that I had written that was all the way to the poppy side of what I had done as a composer. It's this song cycle that's basically like for rock band and electronics and singer, and you know, it's a lot of like verse chorus structure, and you know, it was certainly not something, I mean, I had submitted it along with an orchestra piece that I'd written and some other chamber music, but I just kind of threw it in there. I didn't think at all that it would be the piece that got the award. And he said, we were really moved by the music. And it made me realize that the field of classical music was a lot more open-minded than I thought it was. And that people at the upper levels of orchestras were more open-minded than I thought they were. The boundaries between genres are, you know, not just fluid in the minds of listeners, but in the minds of the administration as well. And this is something that I tell my students to be aware of, that you should really write from your heart, because you never know where it can lead. And you shouldn't feel like you have to write in a certain style, you know, at any given time in order to win a competition, because you just really never know. It's about communicating more than anything that's important.
Yeah,
So,
that's fantastic. And orchestras can really play in any style that you let them and play out for them.
If you have the passion for something, and as Sarah said, you know, if you write what's from your heart, not what you think the award wants or what you think the audience wants to hear, there's always an audience for different kinds of things, which is really super, because if everyone liked exactly the same thing, that would make life really boring. Having the perseverance just to push through and ignore when people don't want to support you or don't understand what you're doing. And I have a saying posted on my wall here by Andy Warhol. It's, don't think about making art, just get it done. Let everyone else decide if it's good or bad, whether they love it or hate it. While they are deciding, make even more art. So that sort of,
Wow.
you just
That's
need to
great.
and persevere. And the other thing, since I do so many collaborative things, is really strongly go out there and find people who are like-minded in various media who can work with you, whether it be a writer or a filmmaker or someone who's a painter or anything like that, because you never know where the inspiration is going to come from. And you know, often I'll get inspired from non-musical things, and I think that's what's really exciting. And now, especially for younger composers, with everything available online, you can tour museums in any country that before were closed unless you had millions of dollars to go and get a ticket.
Similarly to what Veronica and Sarah were saying, you know, just be yourself, you know, like, and it's so hard because in school, you'll feel very alone. Being yourself, like in a university or a conservatory or a grad school, is an isolating experience, and you don't get that instant sort of recognition of like, you're just like everyone else, and there's this weird pressure to be like everyone else, even though we're studying a very creative field that is based on originality. And the second you leave school, all that matters is how original you are, and you have to be original. You have to be yourself. So I've always felt this weird feeling that, you know, what is rewarded in a school setting is not actually what leads to success as a composer. And I know composers often talk about like rediscovering themselves after they leave school and like going back to the thing that is them. And that's, as Sarah described, that's what like makes your career take off, like Penelope did. And I think the other thing is to really seek out mentorship. And to really don't be afraid to reach out to composers who inspire you, who are living a life that looks something like the life you want to lead, and to talk to them. And hopefully maybe some of those people, again, look like you or come from the same place. I wish that I had done that more as a young person. I was too afraid. I thought that I didn't want to bother anyone. And now I get, you know, people reach out to me every day and I write back to all of them. And so it's not a burden. It's actually a joy for most people to help the younger generation have it be a little bit easier for them than it was for us.
Yeah, that's great. I can relate to that a bit because I, as a clarinetist, I felt like I really blossomed after I graduated because I had some really great teachers and they did help me be independent, but there was always that pressure of, the master classes and the recitals and all the standard repertoire I had to learn and, preparing to play orchestral auditions. It wasn't until I graduated and I was out in the world and I stopped taking lessons and I said, you know what? I'm going to play the way I want to play. Can I ask you all about that feeling that you get when you hear your new work played for the first time by live musicians? Like, does that feeling ever go away or die, or is it like that same exhilarating feeling every time?
Right now, we've been so isolated with the plague, and the idea of actually being in a room with live musicians and actually feeling sound waves from these real instruments. I don't know what I'm going to do at the rehearsal. I'm probably going to start crying. So
it never gets old. I mean, my happiest moments of my life are spent in rehearsal. I love being in rehearsal. I love just seeing something come to life with other people in a room. And I've really missed it. And it's just really the happiest time. So yeah, and especially working with professionals is just a joy, and you're bringing something very special and fragile and beautiful into existence, and there's nothing better.
Oh, great. Sarah, do you have any thoughts on just hearing a piece for the first time?
Yeah, no, Missy took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, beautifully said. Those are my happiest moments as well. It never gets old. I just love it. Yeah, and I've really missed it, and it's really been tough going without it. So I'm just really can't wait for the first time. I've had a lot of Zoom rehearsals, and they're just not the same. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all missing just playing with a pulse in the same room, sharing with people. Because for me, I don't know about you all, it's really about the people and the sharing.
Yeah, exactly. It's magical.
Thank you, Missy, Sarah, and Veronica for sharing about your careers and your pieces with the DSO. You can find links to Sarah and Missy's premieres on the DSO website. And please tune in on May 8th for Veronica's piece coming up. And we're really excited. And thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.